Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony, which today commemorates the 105th anniversary of Britain and subsequently Australia declaring war on Germany. My name is Craig Burrell, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Navy is Commander Ross Upton. On this day, 105 years ago, the First World War began. The War of 1914-18 was to become the largest and most costly conflict the world had known. The Great War involved the mobilisation of 70 million men in uniform worldwide. They fought in a global conflict that drew in over 100 countries, caused the disintegration of old empires, and reshaped the political order for much of the 20th century. Over 13 million people died, 9 million of them combatants. Over 1/3 of all the soldiers killed were missing or had no known graves. Many millions more were maimed physically or damaged mentally, adding to the enormous cost to all nations involved. 417,000 Australian men enlisted during the war, amounting to almost half the eligible male population of the country, and over 330,000 of them embarked for overseas service. Almost 2/3 of those who served abroad became casualties, the Australian Imperial Force having the highest proportion of battle casualties of all the forces of the British Empire. Over 60,000, or 1 man in 5 of those who served abroad, died on active service. Of the 264,000 who returned, more than half had suffered through their wounds, both physical and emotional. For Australia, the effects of the war were profound and enduring. This evening, we will hear the story of able seaman Robert David Moffatt, who served with the Australian Naval and Expeditionary Force, the initial Australian force raised shortly after the outbreak of the war. We warmly welcome the family of able seaman Robert David Moffatt, whose story will be told shortly. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by family and visitors to the memorial. Australia's Federation Guard is the tri-service ceremonial unit of the Australian Defence Force. They provide a ceremonial presence at civil and military events and during visits to Australia by foreign dignitaries. The Guard will now dismount the catafalque party from the tomb of the unknown Australian soldier. Please stand and join in singing the national anthem. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the hearts of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Seaman Robert David Moffatt. Bob Moffatt was born on the 1st of May 1894 at Pill Farm in Losbethal, Cornwall, England, to Thomas and Eva Moffatt. He was one of 10 children and the only son born to the couple. The Moffats immigrated to Australia around the turn of the century and settled in Evans Street, Waverley, New South Wales, where Bob attended the nearby Waverley Superior Public School. Short in stature, he was known by his family as Happy Little Bob or Little Bob. In July 1903, Thomas died from pneumonia, aged 65, leaving Eva to raise her children alone. The burden of responsibility fell on Bob as the only male in the family, and despite his youth, it was a role he took on without complaint. As he got older, Bob assisted his mother in running the family store, and he would work, for all appearances, tirelessly from 6 in the morning until late at night. A family friend, retired Royal Navy Lieutenant Sidney Garrett, recalled that Bob was one of the brightest, most gentlemanly and hard-working lads I ever met, and funny in the extreme and ever full of jokes. In his spare time, Bob enjoyed listening to Garrett and his tales of life at sea. Garrett further recalled, "I often think it was largely due to me that he ever took up in the Navy at all, for as a retired deep-water skipper, he was never tired of listening to all my tales of the sea, and it was his joy to borrow an old uniform cap that I kept hanging in the hall. When Bob got that hat on, he was made." Bob entertained dreams of joining the Royal Navy, but Garrett counselled his young friend that he had family obligations, and so he did the next best thing and joined the reserve. Moffatt joined the Royal Australian Naval Reserve aged 17. His stature had not improved throughout his teens, and his service record lists him as standing 4 feet 10 inches tall and weighing 38 kilograms. Moffatt trained at Garden Island and qualified as a signalman. When HMAS Australia arrived in Sydney Harbour for the first time in early October 1913, Moffatt would have had the opportunity not only to tour the pride of the Royal Australian Navy's fleet, but he would have been attached to the ship's company for training. Soon after the outbreak of the First World War, the British government sent a request to the Australian government asking them to raise and send a force to German New Guinea and surrounding territories to destroy wireless stations and occupy those territories. This force, known as the Australian Naval and Military Expeditionary Force, would be made up of an infantry battalion and several other sections attached, and a naval brigade of 500 men divided into 6 companies. As a Royal Australian Naval Reservist, Moffatt was called up for full-time service around the 9th of August and was attached as a signalman to No. 3 Company, led by Lieutenant Oscar Gillen. By the 18th of August, the AN and MEF had gathered at Cockatoo Island, where the soldiers and sailors boarded the transport ship Berrima, which departed the same day, escorted by the bulk of the Royal Australian Navy, including HMAS ships Australia, Encounter, Parramatta, and submarines AE-1 and AE-2. After a brief stop at Palm Island, the force arrived off Kakakal in the early hours of the 11th of September. The initial landing was unopposed, but as the morning went on, the German resistance intensified. Several reinforcement parties were landed during the morning, and Lieutenant Gillen's No. 3 Company, which included Moffatt, was called ashore around midday and began making its way inland towards the sounds of fighting along the road to Bitterpacker. As Gillen and his men neared the fighting, a member of the company, able seaman John Courtney, was shot and killed. Gillen's men located and secured a mine dug in under the road. As there was no detonator discovered, the men moved on. Soon after, No. 3 Company came under fire again, and 2 Australians were wounded, including Moffatt, who was shot twice in the side. One of his comrades later wrote in a letter about Moffatt that as soon as he was hit, he sang out for his mother. Able seaman Gus Shea also helped carry Moffatt some 3 kilometres back to the shore for evacuation, also wrote in a letter that it is terrible to hear the wounded scream. I don't want to hear anymore. Moffatt was taken aboard HMAS Australia, where, despite the administration of morphine, he lingered in agony throughout the night. He succumbed to his wounds around 8 a.m. on the 12th of September. As HMAS Australia got underway for Samoa, Moffatt was buried at sea 3 degrees north of Herbertshoff with full military honours at 11:30 a.m. He was 20 years old. For the first of what would be many occasions during the war, the rector of the Anglican Church of Newtown made his way to a family home to deliver the most unwanted of news. And so it proved as he delivered the news to Eva Moffatt that her son had been killed on active service. She never recovered from the loss of her son and sank into a deep depression. On the 21st of April 1918, she took her own life. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right among almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. His photograph is displayed today beside the Pool of Reflection. This is but one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Seaman Robert David Moffatt, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They have no grave but the cruel sea. No flowers lay at their head. A rusting hulk is their tombstone, a fast on the ocean bed. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Poziere or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial, and we wish you all a very good evening.